Thank you very much, Sister Mary, and thank you for the prayer, preparing our hearts for the word this evening. I think we had a very good session of prayer and intercession, and just wanted to say how much I sensed God's guidance and leading in what happened there, the prayer service. Well, good evening to all that are gathered online. And I have been asked to lead a study, or really it's going to be two studies because it's going to be 2 weeks that I'm supposed to be presenting. It will be this week and the week after next week, because next week will be the week of prayer. So, and then I've been directed also to lead a study under more or less a series or under the top, or the theme, I should say, the providence of God. The providence of God. Because this theme is so prominent in Scripture, and there are many ways from which one could approach it. Whether you could look at the providence of God in individuals, in the development of the history of the Bible through the life of Israel coming on into the New Testament and through the church. There are various ways it could be approached, but I decided this evening that I would, what I'd say, have meditations of the providence of God at the national level, dealing with God's dealing with countries and things of that sort at the national level. And I should also state at the outset that the whole topic of the providence of God is a very challenging topic with much controversy. A lot of scholarly work has been done on it, and it is one that has many questions that are, I said, difficult to answer. And I hope I put that like a caveat at the beginning of what I'm going to present. The doctrine of the doctrine of providence or divine providence has often been described as a difficult doctrine. Not because it is difficult to believe and accept, but because it is difficult to understand and explain. We all accept the fact that God rules over the affairs of man, that God is in charge, that God knows all. But when we are challenged to explain how this happens, that's when our difficulty arises. And if it's any consolation to you all, I don't have all the answers. And in my own studies over many years on this, I realized that most people, that nobody really has all the answers. But this is, in fact, one of the beauties of it, because it's a humbling thing, as it defies the human mind to unravel its mysteries and become an authority on the subject. No more than asking people to explain the incarnation, and they have to stand apart and say, and they could make the declaration of what the truths from various points of view of God being fully God and fully man, but try to explain how that union takes place in one person has challenged scholarly minds for centuries. And why attempt to do what God never intended us to do? He wants to keep us as being human, and he being God. God that is inexplainable in many ways. Yet, despite the fact that's mystery, that we will never become an authority on the subject, yet it remains a most comforting doctrine on which the believing soul can find rest. I know God is in charge, even when I can't understand it or explain it. He remains in charge. The proud human mind resists any principle or concept that causes us to have to acknowledge we don't know, nor can't explain it. We just have to accept, like the psalmist says in Psalm 139, that is too wonderful for me. It is high, I can't attain unto it. And so it remains. We'll never enter into the province of God, but we delight in having a God like that. So I'll start by looking at certain terms, and I should probably mention, I said I'd deal with it, the providence of God, more on a national basis this week. And when I next deal with the topic, which would be the 18th, I would then deal with it on a personal or individual basis by looking at certain lives in scripture and seeing how God's providential hand was at work. And I can tell you in advance, although I was hoping to mention this near the end of the study, but now that it's crossed my mind, I better mention it, because knowing how my mind works, I will totally forget later on. But I wanted to look at two New Testament examples of God's providential working in the life of Peter and Paul. Why I'm giving you that in advance is that you can then do your own study looking on that topic, and come prepared to make contributions on it. God's providential act in the lives of those two men, Peter and Paul. But now let's deal with the topic I said we're going to do on this a broader basis. And look first at the definition of what we mean by providence. When doing these definitions, particularly of words that have a theological ring to it, I like referring to Webster's dictionary from 1913, not the new Merriam-Webster dictionary, but the old Webster's dictionary 1913, because of course, if many of you know of Daniel Webster, who did that dictionary, he was a committed believer. And if you ever read any of dictionary definitions from that time, not only does he give the meaning of a word, but he'll also give scripture that supports meaning that he has given. So if we look at the word providence from the Webster's dictionary 1913, you'll see him saying the act of providing or preparing for future use or application. The act of providing or preparing for future use or application. Providence is also a making ready, a preparation. That's what providence is. God preparing, making ready for something he wants to do. Another definition is that he has given, number 2, foresight, care, especially the foresight and care which God manifests for his creatures. Hence, God himself regarded as exercising a constant wise prescience. Number 3, and as Webster put it there, the theological meaning, it's a manifestation of the care and superintendence which God exercises over his creatures, an event ordained by divine direction. Now, I've given you 3 meanings, definitions provided there by Webster from his dictionary. And while that may give a definition, what I wanted to move to is the theological explanation of providence. As I said, that providence is really a reflection of who God is, the nature of God. And to do that, one of the best places I could go for theological explanation, and it can get a bit heady because this is really old English writings that, it tends to be very wordy and use a lot of English terms that you don't use anymore, like doth and thou and things of that sort. But if you read from the Westminster Confessions of Faith, chapter 5, which gives a definition of providence, and listen me carefully as I say this, because as I said, you have to concentrate when reading how these minds, brilliant minds from way back there in the early 17th century wrote. It says, number one, God, the great creator of all things, doth uphold, direct, dispose, and govern all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, according to his infallible foreknowledge and the free and immutable counsel of his own will, to the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. Now, as I was reeling that off, I thought to myself, I didn't provide much of in a PowerPoint or anything like that, but this would have been a good one for me to have given a screen share so you could see that in case anyone wanted to have that particular phraseology provided by the Westminster Catechism. So there it is. You probably have that on your screen showing now. I repeat it. God, the great creator of all things, doth uphold, direct, dispose, and govern all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, according to his infallible foreknowledge and the free, immutable counsel of his own will, to the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. And you will see below there, and that's why I decided to do a screen print. So if anyone wanted to jot down any of those passages that supports this this confession of faith, and I'm sure you've heard from, since Pastor Mark tend to use a lot from the Westminster Confessions of Faith. These, as they used to call them, these divines, these early church theologians came up with these things over a very long period of time. Many of these things have hardly been improved on since that day. So they still are very relevant and still very worthy to be studied. The second theological explanation given under the Confessions of Faith is, although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause, all things come to pass immutably and infallibly, yet by the same providence, he ordereth them to fall out according to the nature of second causes, either necessarily, freely, or contingently. There you have that written there. I'll move on from that, as you can have the passages there. I'll hold it up for a little while. But just picking up from what was said there, the key items from this theological explanation regarding his providence is that God governs, directs, and controls all things according to his foreknowledge. He is the first cause. That's who God is. He governs, directs, and controls all things, which means there is nothing that occurs that God is not involved in governing, directing, and controlling. Good things and bad things, fair weather and foul weather. You know, it's always interesting that and I can understand it, we get excited and praise God when good things happen. When bad things happen, the first thing is we probably blame the devil, or we think that nothing is praiseworthy about it. But the truth of the matter is God is in charge of everything. And even if the devil does anything, the devil still has to answer to God. That's who God is. And this is why the topic of providence is so important for us to have a good grasp of, because it helps us then to have a view, and I would put it more than that, a right view of God, and keep him in the right place that he ought to be kept in our minds. We have to have that type of view of God. And when we do have that view of God, it allows us to realize, God, you are in control. You are enthroned above every situation. So the first thing we learned from that explanation, God governs, directs, and controls all things. The second thing is that God's purpose in his providence is for the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. And I would love to just spend another minute on that, because one of the false ideas that we many times develop over the years of being believers and around Christians is that God's primary goal is our comfort and our enjoyment. And that's so wrong. Yes, those are good things, but God's primary goal is his own glory, is his own praise. And that's why God is more interested in what he wants to make of us than what becomes comfortable to us. And that, having that idea deals with a lot of things that people believe that, look here, if something is going adversely, God can't be in it. No, God is more interested. He didn't stop the Hebrew boys from the fire, but he realized that he could get glory in them through the fire. So God providentially caused these things to happen. Don't blame who was that, Belshazzar, who caused them to go into the fire at the time. The fact is that God gets glory out of these things. This is why it moves to the second point. God uses second causes. No, he's the first cause, but God uses second causes, whether sourced from what appears as coincidental circumstances, like this just happened. You have a plane crash. People die. Things are disrupted. Yet through that situation, God can use it for his own glory and his benefit. Sickness that happens, God can use these second causes. Notice he's not the first cause of it, but he can use these second causes, coincidental circumstances, consequences of a fallen world, like a hurricane, an earthquake. These sicknesses and diseases, these are consequences of a fallen world in which we live. But God still can use these second causes to still work out things for his glory and for his purpose and his will. Or God can use choices, whether good or bad, by depraved humans and still cause them to fall out, to use the Westminster Catechism or Westminster Confession, to fall out and accomplish his divine purposes. I'm sure that mentioning these points will cause it to ring out in your mind things like, what we popularly use, Romans 8:28, when he said, all things work together for good to them that love God, those who are called according to his purpose, because God can use all things for his glory. So having looked into this whole, this is why I many times say it's a difficult doctrine, and indeed it's one that unbelievers use a lot to attack believers on and say, explain to me, how can you have sickness as being something that God allows? And you have to let them realize that, look here, God is not the author of these things, but he can still use it for his glory. And they have great difficulty with this whole idea of God's sovereignty and his providence in the affairs of men. But that's who our God is, and don't shy away from it just because it's a difficult doctrine and people have trouble understanding how that happened. You have had more people becoming atheists over the topic of pain and suffering than nearly any other topic, because they don't believe a good God should allow pain and suffering. So God uses the second clauses, and his providence is based on, first of all, his sovereignty. His sovereignty is really wrapped up in this idea, his power over creation. His power over creation. That's his sovereignty. As tends to happen with me many times, I'll say something and then the words of a song comes across my mind. And there is one that I remember singing quite a lot. Our Father's wondrous works we see in the earth and sea and sky. He rules over all in majesty from his royal throne on high. What a mighty God we serve. That's a concept that has to penetrate our minds. He's sovereign over all. Everything bows below him. Then his providence is based on his sovereignty, and secondly, his foreknowledge. His foreknowledge, which we can regard, or as the Westminster divines put it, his prescience. That's an interesting word because you get it prescience. Science means knowledge, pre means before. So knowing before it happens what is going to happen. God's perfect knowledge of everything before it happens, both the beginning and the outcome. Oh boy, that's something to think about. Thinking about that is enough to blow my mind, how God would know everything from the beginning. As someone said many years, I always found it an intriguing thing when they asked a young 12-year-old person what they understood by God's providence, and the person said, well, I understand from my teacher, God never has to say, oops, that it catches him unawares. He knows in advance what is going to happen. That's something we don't think about day-to-day lives, that the happenings that occur, things that knock us over, cause us to be distraught and discouraged. When we are brought low by them, and we begin thinking of God and his word regarding this, then we have to come to the understanding, Lord, long before this happened, you knew it was going to happen. Now, I don't know what that makes you feel, because sometimes people, the reaction of that is that I'm going to be angry at God, because if he knew it, why did he allow it? The other reaction is that I am comforted by this, because it meant that it had to pass through his hands before it came to me. So he either grants the grace to deal with it, or knows how, the path to take me through it. But whichever way it goes, my sovereign Lord, my providential Father, will use it for his glory and for my good. And that is enough to cause us to worship and praise. You see, since I'm having an exercise that you're going to do, I don't want to spend much longer just on this introductory part of this. But the other day, I read an article, I think Valerie passed it to me, from a BBC series that deals with, and anyone who is interested in, anyone, I would go to say, any geekish type person or boring type person who like these type of things can always Google and find it, that BBC was starting a series of articles or research, documentaries on this topic called immensities. Immensities. And it was a fascinating article. And the subtitle for the first one in the series is The Upsides of Feeling Small. Now, this article wasn't written by, as far as I know, a believer or someone that was taking a Christian perspective at all. But there are certain aspects of that article that really spoke to my mind about what do we do in responding to things that are amazingly immense, beyond our understanding or sometimes on comprehension. And what the author of that article was emphasizing on is that these things cause you to feel small. But there's an upside of feeling small. In a certain part of the article, he said, awe, this word that is not used many times anymore, good old English word that has so much gravity to it, A-W-E, awe, is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. Again, another song that comes my mind when I read those words about awe. I think I don't remember if it's the last verse of the song Love Divine or Love Excelling, but it comes, a certain part of it, lost in wonder, awe, and praise. And one of the problems I don't want to be judgmental about this, but the idea of wonder and awe seem to be diminishing in the modern world. I think because of technology and the great discoveries that men have had, it's as if we don't marvel at things anymore, as if we expect, it's just what's expected as more scientific knowledge comes through. But I would challenge them, as this person wrote, he said, when I look back at that overwhelming day in Wales more than a decade ago, staring up at the cloud-capped snow down, that's a mountain, I knew little about the philosophy of the sublime or the psychological benefits of awe and wonder. What mattered was how it felt in that moment. The idea of staring at immensity. It's the same feeling you'll get when going out on the ocean, for those of you who have ever gone on the ocean, and you see how vast it is and how little it causes you to feel. It's the same feeling that astronauts will get when they go into outer space and they look back at what we call Earth and realize it is just a little dot in the universe. And you say, wow. It's the same feeling you get when you see not only these vast things, but you look into the intricacies of a little flower. And you said, oh my God, what could have made this? Only a great God. And you are lost in wonder, awe, and praise. Because when you see something so intricate, so great, so immense, you begin to feel small and you realize how great God is and how small I am. I could enjoy talking about that a bit more, but let's get on to what I really wanted to do. I wanted you, therefore, I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah chapter 45, which I think it's a great, amongst many other Old Testaments to see for the providential hand of God. This one tends to stick out quite a bit with me. I mean, you know the providence of God in the life of a man like Joseph, or you know the providential hand of God in the life of Ruth, taking her from a Moabite widow to become the great grandparents of David. That's providence. The timing was amazing. Or looking in the life of Esther, that how could you cause an egotistical, pompous king, Ahasuerus, because he was miffed when his wife Vashti wouldn't go parade herself before the other leaders, and he was half drunk himself. He got so vexed to try to hold up or show off his manliness. He decided to make a rash judgment and say, Vashti, your history. And you realize all of that with a crazy man, a pompous creature, an egotistical being like that king, was all part of the providence of God to get Esther into the palace for such a time as this. Oh boy. I don't want to get carried away with this, but when you begin to think of the providence of God working these things out for his own purpose, causing the king to have a night of insomnia, to have to then read something that caused him then led to the demotion and the hanging of a Haman and the promotion of a Mordecai. How could that have happened? Unless God is working behind the scenes, making sure these things come to pass. So look at Isaiah 45, and oh geez, how much time I want to give you to this. Let me give you, it's 8, according to my computer clock, it's 8:45 now. If I give you 10 minutes, it's fairly long passage, 25 verses, not that long, 10 minutes to read through this. And when you go through this, highlight areas of God's sovereignty over creation and people, and evidences of his foreknowledge. So you're going to look at 1, sovereignty of God over creation and people. 2, God's foreknowledge. Lastly, and I mean, I'll get to that with your review, but his purpose in his providence. So here goes, 8:45. So that means I will 8:55. I will bring it back to hear what you have found out about God's sovereignty over creation and people and his foreknowledge. Over to you.
Sorry, Rev, you want to put them in breakout rooms?
I never even thought of that. And that would have been a good idea, isn't it? Is it something you can knock up quickly, Cleve?
I could with your guidance if you told me what you wanted.
Well, let's have let's have three rooms of four rooms, two dealing with the first one, what you see there regarding his sovereignty over creation and people. So two groups dealing with that, and then two groups dealing with evidences of God's foreknowledge. Okay, everyone's back, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Okay, good. Well, I know that may have been, is a complaint that may have been too short a time. Maybe not. But I will first apologize because clearly I'm going to go quite a bit beyond our closing time tonight. I should have asked Sister Mary for permission for another, 15, 20 minutes? Okay, Sister Mary. But let me begin asking, who looked and saw where for the evidences of God's sovereignty of creation and people? Well, which groups did that? And who can be a spokesperson for that?
Sorry, Brother Smelly, we didn't get the Bible passage because our Wi-Fi is going every 10 seconds. So let us at least hear what the Bible passage is.
It was Isaiah 45. But
okay.
None of your fellow group members helped you out there?
No, the Wi-Fi chips in every 10 seconds. It goes every 10 seconds.
Okay. All right.
Isaiah 25?
45.
45, okay.
45. Okay, now who can tell me, I suppose group one or group two, could I have someone from that group telling me what you saw about God's sovereignty over creation and people from that passage? Nobody?
The time was a little short. We were reading the passage when it chipped out.
Oh Lord. So shall I assume that anybody has anything to say about that then, God's sovereignty over creation and people? Anybody, any passage?
Well, I'm looking down at, is it 18?
Okay.
For the Lord is God, and he created the heaven and earth and put everything in place, which tells me that he really created the earth. That's what it is saying. And he made the world to be lived in, not to be a place of empty chaos. That's passage that went down, reading down there near the end.
Yep, seeing that, verse 18. Okay. So therefore that shows he's creator. He's in charge. And he's in charge over his creation. And because he created for people to be in, he also is in charge of the people he puts inside there. Any other passage anyone wants to say on that?
Yeah. Verse 7. Verse 7, yeah.
Verse 7.
Yeah.
I form light. Boy, when you touch on verse 7, and I'm not going to have much time to get in a conversation about that, but that's one that from way back, some unbelieving person or some atheist used to knock me with that one. How could God say, I form light and create darkness? I make well-being and I create calamity. I am the Lord who does these things. And many of you could probably drop your toes when you're attacked on that. But just remember, it is showing that God is in charge, even if the things seem bad. It does not mean he has done it as much as he is the ultimate cause of it. Somebody breathe out on that one because it's a tough doctrine.
Yes, yes.
But if you think about it, if you know the story of Job, that the devil had to ask God's permission to do what he wanted to do, which included killing off his family. So God had to give permission, not instigated by him, but as we read earlier on in that catechism, that's why that was so important. His sovereignty causes him to govern, direct, and control all things. Right? So when you get that concept on down, you'll appreciate that. Now because in the interest of time and the times are running out here, his call of Cyrus show that God is in charge of his creation. He said, look when you look at that call of Cyrus and how many times you see that I will. I do this. Do you see that?
Yeah.
He said, verse 1, I have grasped his hand, by the right hand, right? I will go before you. I will break pieces of bronze, the doors of bronze, cut through iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness. Here is God. And in his sovereignty said, I will do all of this. Okay? Now that's what you talk about sovereignty, power, authority over all these things, because God can do this. Now, when we come to the next thing, and I know I'm jumping ahead. I mean, there are many others in this particular passage. That's why later on it spoke about, look here, when I do this thing, woe unto the person. In verse 9, I remember, could be about 4 years ago, I think this was a topic under this theme that we dealt with at Grace. Woe unto him who strives with him who formed him, like a pot saying to the person who formed it, why have you made me thus? You can't question the maker why he made something the way he did, because he's God. And that he has the authority. That's when you deal with his sovereignty and hence his providence. Now with his foreknowledge, look at verse 11. When he says, ask of me things to come. Oh, sorry, I didn't give those. I remember in group breakout 3, I did mention, ask those people in particular to talk about his foreknowledge. Anyone who picked up on any verses on that in that third group?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, there are some verses we thought of. And in verse 1, we believe that one was also foreknowledge.
Please say the part of it there.
Right, he said, to Cyrus whose right hand I take hold, to subdue nations before him and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut.
So even before the doors are open and so on, God is telling him that this is what is going to happen in the future. Very good. Any other ones?
Yes, verse 2 also. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut down bars of iron.
Yep.
I will give you the treasures of darkness, richly stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God.
That's such an interesting one, because these treasures are hidden in secret places. Yes. But there's somebody who knows where the secret treasures are hidden. I, the Lord. Any other one you're gonna say?
Yes. I think verse 4 also, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. Yeah.
Did you have in your listing there verse 11?
Yeah, but
No, I had
yes,
14.
11.
11 is a key one.
Or,
11 was there.
Okay,
or,
Yeah, 11,
okay.
11. We had 11. Yeah.
right. Ask
That
of me
thus
things
said
to
the
come.
Lord, the Holy One of Israel,
Mhm.
things to come.
Things to come.
Yes.
Way before it happens, ask of me these things. So that shows his foreknowledge of these things.
And 14
And 14.
Yep.
and 17.
Well, I will even say before getting to 14, how about 13? He said, he shall build my city and set my exiles free. All before it happens. Right? He's telling him that.
Yeah.
Not for a price nor a reward.
So
Sorry, Rev.
we
See,
didn't
Norma
finish
has
the chapter, you know. I think we only got to verse 17, right, Marcel?
Yes,
Oh, you didn't get that much further. Yeah, I realized you ran out of time, and I apologize for that because I got to that a bit later than I'd like.
The Egyptians and that shall be subject to you. He knows all that's going to happen.
Right?
They're going to attack you. They're
Mhm.
going to come to you.
Yeah.
Egyptians, Ethiopians,
They will touch
Sabians.
behind you,
Yep.
coming over to you in chains. They will bow down before you and plead with you, saying, surely God is with you, and there is no other. There is no other God.
I say it's a powerful passage on Providence. Foreknowledge. I just going to ask Norma, but she looks like her hands came down. So let me move on here. Now, you know what's so beautiful? By the way, the one I didn't give you, and maybe it's a good thing because we're running out of time. I told you about his sovereignty over creation and people, his foreknowledge of all events. Third thing, his purpose. Why is God exercising his providence? What is purpose in his providence? I don't, in time, I don't think you had enough chance to look on there. But why is God doing all of this? Why is he showing his providence? Anybody saw a passage that supports that? Why? Well, let me answer quickly. One of the reasons he's showing it is to say that I am God and there is none other. Sister Norma, you're saying, I see your hand again. Go ahead, Norma. Norma?
Yes. Oh my God. What is that?
Were you saying something?
Yes, I was saying his purpose is that because he's God and there is no other God apart from him. Down in verse 21, he said, was it not I, the Lord, who foretold this long ago, who declared it from the distant past? Was it not I, the Lord, and there is no God apart from me, a righteous God and a Savior? There is none but me.
That's right.
Turn to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth.
I am God.
For I am God and there is no other.
Very
By
great,
myself
great
have
passage.
sworn.
Great passage about why the God's purpose in doing this.
Yes.
And verse 25.
And verse 25 going down says, but in the Lord all the descendants of Israel will be found righteous and will exalt.
That they will exalt. That they will give glory to him.
Yes.
So God is doing all of this for his own glory. That's why God does these things in his providence. Now, in the interest of time, let me just give you something now, a little nugget. It's going to take a little time because it's going back up in a bit of history. But you've seen all these facts in Isaiah 45. You know what is so fascinating about this whole passage? When you understand the background and you understand then God's providence. This was written when Isaiah wrote this, it was about 150 years before any of this happened. Let that sink in. 150 years before any of that happened. If you want proof of this, you can read Isaiah 1 verse 1, the times in which Isaiah was writing. It will say that he wrote during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. During the reign of these kings, that's when Isaiah was writing. That spanned from 790 to 686 BC. Just make a mental note of that. He was writing during the time of these kings who reigned between 790 and 686 BC. Here the next point. Judah, about which Isaiah was writing, was conquered by Babylon in 605 BC, which is 80 years after the last king under which Isaiah was writing. That's when Judah was conquered by Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And that led to the first exile. And the final exile and the destruction of Jerusalem was in 586 BC, nearly 100 years after the reign of the last king under which Isaiah was writing. Now, if you are not amazed at this, that he was writing all of this was going to happen over 100 years before it happened. Now, let me tell you another fact. Cyrus, who was the founder of the Persian Empire, came to the throne in 559 BC. I don't know if it has hit you yet, but if Cyrus came to the throne of Persia in 559 BC, Isaiah wrote about him nearly 120 years beforehand. And this prophecy, written therefore long before Cyrus was born, yet God called him by name. You don't get this, because this is one of the times I wish I was saying this when I was looking at the face of the audience. God called him and named him and emphasized the fact that when you look in verse 4, and earlier than that, I have called you by name. Long before you were ever born, before your parents thought about you, I, the Lord, did this. No, you read that and you can't say, God is sovereign. God is in charge of all of this. And what God was calling him by name to tell him, and you can read the first calling by name from chapter 44, verse 25, when he said, I called Cyrus by name. Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BC. And then that's when Persia conquered Babylon. Cyrus was in charge over now that empire, the Persian Empire. And the very next year after Persia conquered Babylon, Cyrus issued the decree that the Jews now could return from exile to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And all I can look at that and say, wow, God caused Cyrus to be born. God caused Cyrus to conquer these countries, conquering the same country that conquered Judah and Jerusalem, Babylon, in order that Cyrus would be born, in order that Cyrus would issue a decree that the people can go back and rebuild the temple. And God said to Cyrus, all these things, look here, I'm going to make you so powerful. You're going to subdue nations. You're going to open doors. You're going to get all this treasury. You're going to get all of these things because I am giving it to you. And why am I giving it to you? So you are able to give it to the people of God so they can go back and build a temple. Can you imagine all of this? But more intriguing than that, God used Cyrus to accomplish all these things, and this now some of you are going to probably feel this very awkward. Yet he remained a heathen king. And as verse 4 tell you, I am calling you by name, even though you don't know me. And in verse 5, he said, I am doing this. I am the Lord, there is no other. Beside me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me. And that's why when it starts off in verse 1, thus said the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. God calls Cyrus anointed, even, and that's a name they use for kings and for prophets. God called him anointed. Why? Because he's going to do God's bidding. I know you're going to have a lot of questions and we're not going to have time to entertain them now, but you can think about this, and when we get to the next class, we can probably review some of this. But let me just try to end by putting you this in this way. When we think of God and his providence, think of God like a designer, an architect, and a builder of an elaborate edifice. Whether it's a castle or a cathedral or what, God is doing this. God sees the big picture when we are limited to a small snapshot. You used to hear that phrase, don't allow children or fools to come onto a construction project. You know why they say that? They're going to talk nonsense. They're going to say, what are you doing here? All I can see is rubble. All I can see is blocks all over the place. Also, they can't see the big picture. Even when it sometimes get very far in the construction project, they say, what is that? That will give that. People like me are really dumb when it comes to things like that. Bear in mind, the designer, the architect, he put it in place. He is seeing the overall picture, the macro image of this. Whereas we are only seeing a brief spot in the whole journey. That's what our life is in the hand of God. And when we fly in the face of God and say, God, that shouldn't be done this way, or, you know, my brother should not have died, or this person should not have left me and divorced me, and so on. You're seeing a small snapshot. God has the overall picture in his mind, right? The next thing is God uses things and people who we would never accept as part of the project. Lord, you just need to see it in the case of Cyrus. Israel would never have factored in a Cyrus, but God had him to fulfill a particular plan at a particular time. You know an intriguing thing about Cyrus? If you ever read the beginning of the book of Daniel, you'll see that Daniel was in exile from the time he was taken by Nebuchadnezzar, which was about the first exile, I think it was, under the time when Jehoiakim was reigning. And he was there until Cyrus reigned, which could have been a period of 80 odd years. Till Cyrus reigned, Daniel was still there in Babylon. God works in ways and in time frames that are beyond our understanding. But while saying all this, and Sister Norma, acknowledge, I see your hand. Let me see if it's a quick one, Norma, and then, or else I just wanted not to mess up my thought. Is still there, Norma? Or are you gone? Okay, let me continue. God's providence is no excuse. This is a caution. God's providence is no excuse for the volitional acts of humanity. His providence will not exempt us from the pain for our wrongs.
You know, the song, sometimes you find us.
Say that again, Sister Mary.
I was just thinking of this song. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations that we just cannot understand. But when we trust him, we find out it's part of his plan.
And
I don't know
beautiful.
if Cleve can find that song. A beautiful song. Some, you know,
Cleve
I
will
just
have to
think
go into
when
the
you
archives.
mentioned about the seeing the small part,
Yeah, one is a small part.
situations we cannot understand.
So we will, so that's a caution. And the illustrations of that caution, that even if when we do wrong or wrong is done, people are not going to be excused and say, well, God caused it to happen. He's the first cause. People will do wrong because of their own decisions, even though God knew that they would do it. And God can use what they did, like God did with Pharaoh. But because God did, Pharaoh is going to be without excuse. No different from when Joseph met up with his brothers using that famous verse in Genesis 50 verse 20. He said, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. That's providence. Just like Peter on the day of Pentecost, when he, Acts 2:23, he said, you delivered up, talking to the Sanhedrin, you delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. What he's saying, God's crucifixion was not something that took God by surprise. God said it was Peter was saying it was according to God's definite plan and the foreknowledge of God. That's God's sovereignty. But you crucified and killed him by the hands of lawless man. That's your responsibility. That's why it's such a difficult question. So ultimately, if I can close, and I know it's hard to close such an intense type of discussion, ultimately, we trust when we cannot understand. Ultimately, we follow as he leads. Ultimately, we worship because we believe he will accomplish his plan for his glory and for our good. And we can meditate on Romans 8:28 because we know also in verse 29 it said, for whom he did foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of Jesus. That's God's goal. Not our ease or prosperity or our comfort, that we may be conformed to the image of his son. So may his providence cause us to rest on his promises and character and then worship. Amen. Sorry again, Sister Mary, for the running over time, but as you can see, it was quite an involved topic.
Amen. Brother Smelly, it was well worth it. What a beautiful study. Let us all say amen.